She believed her grandfather no longer remembered his own name, until he looked at the feared Mafia boss across the room and spoke a title no one had heard in decades. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe for more stories, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from today. The first time he forgot her name, Sophia told herself it was exhaustion. Her grandfather had always been stubborn about sleep. Even at 83, Leonardo Marino insisted on staying up late, watching old black and white films with the volume too loud and the lights too dim. When he blinked at her across the kitchen table and asked, "You're Maria's daughter, yes?" she had smiled gently and blamed it on fatigue. "No," she corrected softly, reaching for his hand. "I'm Sophia." He stared at her for a long moment, confusion flickering behind eyes that had once missed nothing. "Of course," he murmured finally. "Sophia." But something had shifted. It didn't happen all at once. It arrived in fragments. He forgot the day of the week. Then he forgot which cabinet held the coffee cups in the same kitchen he had cooked in for 40 years. He misplaced his watch 3 times in one afternoon, accusing the mailman of taking it before finding it in his coat pocket. Sophia began writing reminders on small yellow notes and sticking them to the refrigerator. "Doctor appointment, Tuesday. Take morning pills. Sophia will visit at 4 p.m. At first, he laughed about it. "My brain is just tired," he said, tapping his temple with a crooked smile. "Too many stories inside." But the stories began to tangle. One evening, she found him standing outside his apartment building, coat unbuttoned in the cold. "No," she called, heart already racing. He turned slowly. "I'm looking for my brother," he said. Her stomach dropped. He didn't have a living brother. He hadn't for decades. "You're home," she told him gently, guiding him back inside. "No," he insisted. "We live on Via Roma, near the market." They had never lived on Via Roma. That was a street from his childhood. The diagnosis came 3 weeks later. The neurologist's office smelled sterile and faintly of lemon polish. Sophia sat beside him, fingers laced tightly together, while the doctor spoke in careful, rehearsed tones. "Early-stage dementia," she said. "We'll monitor progression. Medication may slow symptoms, but there is no reversal." No reversal. Sophia felt the words like something pressing down on her lungs. Leonardo listened quietly. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply nodded once. "As long as I still know who she is," he said, glancing toward Sophia, "I'm fine." Her throat tightened. On the drive home, he was unusually silent. That frightened her more than the diagnosis. Over the following months, the forgetting accelerated. He would call her by her mother's name. He would forget whether he had eaten. Once, he accused her gently of moving furniture that hadn't been touched in years. "You're rearranging things," he said suspiciously. "I'm not," she whispered, but arguing only upset him. Eventually, the safety concerns outweighed pride. She moved him into a private care facility on the edge of the city, clean, quiet, well-staffed. The day she signed the paperwork felt like betrayal. "I'm not a child," he said, sitting upright in the intake office, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I know," she replied. "This is temporary." They both understood it wasn't. The facility was gentle. Sunlight filtered through wide windows. Nurses spoke softly. Other residents shuffled slowly through hallways lined with framed landscapes meant to calm anxious minds. But nothing could soften the look in his eyes the first night she left him there. "Don't be long," he said. "I won't." She visited every day. Sometimes he greeted her warmly. Other days he looked at her like a polite stranger. "Can I help you?" he would ask. Each time it felt like losing him again. She learned to adapt, to answer calmly. "I'm Sophia, your granddaughter." He would study her face carefully, searching for something familiar. Sometimes he found it. Sometimes he didn't. The hardest moments were the flashes of clarity. When he would suddenly grip her hand tightly and whisper, "Something's wrong with me," she would force a smile. "We're just adjusting," she'd say. But at night, alone in her apartment, she would sit on the floor and cry quietly so no one could hear. Because the man who had raised her, who had taught her how to ride a bicycle, who had told her stories of the old neighborhood without ever going into detail, was slipping away piece by piece. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. She thought the worst part was watching him forget the present. She didn't yet know that the past was still very much intact, and waiting. Sophia's days began and ended at the facility. The building sat on a quiet stretch of road lined with trimmed hedges and carefully planted trees, designed to look peaceful enough that families could convince themselves it was a choice rather than a necessity. The sign out front read, "Riverview Memory Care," in soft blue letters. Nothing about it hinted at loss. She parked in the same spot every afternoon. Routine mattered. For him. For her. Inside, the air always carried the same blend of antiseptic and brewed coffee. The receptionist greeted her by name now, offering a sympathetic smile that never felt forced. "Room 12, she would say gently, even though Sophia no longer needed the reminder. Leonardo's room faced the courtyard garden. A small fountain trickled water over smooth stones. The steady sound meant to soothe wandering minds. Sometimes he would be sitting upright in his armchair when she arrived, hands folded neatly in his lap like he was waiting for an appointment. Other days he would be staring out the window, lost in a landscape only he could see. "No, no," she would say softly, never too loud, never too abrupt. He would turn, and there would be that split second, the pause where recognition either came or didn't. On good days, his face would soften. "Sophia," he would say clearly. On harder days, he would squint slightly. "Are you one of the nurses?" Each time she answered with patience she didn't always feel. "I'm your granddaughter." He would nod politely, as if accepting information rather than remembering it. She learned not to correct him when he drifted into different decades. When he asked about her grandmother as if she were still alive, Sophia would answer gently. "She's resting," she'd say. It wasn't entirely a lie. When he spoke about his childhood street, describing market stalls and narrow alleys that hadn't existed in 50 years, she listened. She let him live there for a while. Dignity mattered. She made sure his hair was trimmed, his sweaters folded properly, his watch placed back on his wrist each morning, even when he insisted it wasn't his. It was a gift, she would remind him. "From who?" he'd ask. "From me." He would smile faintly. "Then I'll keep it." The staff respected him. There was something about Leonardo Marino that commanded quiet acknowledgement, even in confusion. He didn't shout like some residents. He didn't wander the halls aimlessly. He observed. Even when his memory fractured, his posture remained straight, his gaze steady, but the fractures were widening. Once, during dinner in the common room, he stood abruptly and accused another resident of taking his seat. "This is mine," he said firmly. Sophia hurried over, touching his arm gently. "It's okay," she whispered. "We can sit here instead." He resisted at first, pride flashing through the haze, but eventually he allowed her to guide him away. Later in his room, he seemed embarrassed. "I didn't mean to make a scene," he said quietly. "You didn't," she assured him. But she saw the confusion in his eyes, the way he couldn't fully grasp what had happened. She began keeping a small notebook in her bag. When he asked the same question 3 times in 1 hour, "What day is it? Are we going home? Did I work today?" she answered each time as if it were the first. Patience became muscle memory. There were moments of strange clarity. He would correct her grammar absent-mindedly, or recite a line from an old film perfectly, or comment on the way a nurse carried herself. "That one is disciplined," he once muttered under his breath. Disciplined. The word lingered oddly. Sophia assumed it was leftover vocabulary from another era. One afternoon, she found him staring at his reflection in the mirror. "Do I look old?" he asked. Her throat tightened. "You look like you," she said. He studied his face carefully. "I used to be stronger." "You still are." He gave her a faint smile. "You protect me now," he said. The simplicity of it hurt. "I'm supposed to," she replied. But there were moments she wasn't sure she was enough. The doctors called it progression. They spoke in timelines and stages. They told her to prepare for increasing confusion, personality shifts, eventual disconnection. "Prepare!" As if anyone could rehearse losing someone in slow motion. Still, she came every day. She brought photos from home, old records he used to play, his favorite almond cookies. She shielded him from pitying glances. She corrected staff gently if they spoke about him in the third person, while he sat right there. "He can hear you," she would say. Because even when he forgot dates, even when he forgot her name, he still had pride. She believed the worst part of dementia was watching the present slip through his fingers. She didn't realize yet that some parts of his memory were not fading at all. They were simply waiting for the right face to appear. The first thing Sophia noticed was the silence. It didn't happen instantly. It spread. Conversations in the hallway lowered. A nurse paused mid-sentence at the reception desk. Even the soft music playing through the facility speakers seemed quieter, as if the building itself had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. Sophia looked up from the crossword puzzle she had been pretending to solve, while her grandfather napped in his armchair. Through the wide window overlooking the front drive, she saw them. 3 black cars. Polished. Identical. Idling in synchronized stillness. They didn't belong in the parking lot of Riverview Memory Care, where most vehicles were practical sedans and aging minivans with family stickers on the back windows. Doors opened. Men stepped out first. Dark suits. Earpieces subtle but visible if you knew to look. Movements disciplined but not theatrical. Sophia's stomach tightened. "We're not that important," she murmured under her breath. Her first assumption was simple. A donor. The facility occasionally hosted wealthy benefactors, people who funded new wings or therapy programs and arrived with understated displays of security. She stood slowly and moved toward the hallway. Curiosity, not fear. Yet, at the reception desk, 2 nurses were whispering, "Did you know about this?"
No.
"Is it a politician?" Sophia forced a polite smile as she passed them. "It's probably nothing," she said lightly, more to reassure herself than anyone else. Behind her, in room 12, Leonardo stirred faintly in his chair. The front doors opened, and then he stepped inside. The man did not rush. He did not scan the room like someone assessing a threat. He moved with quiet certainty. Tailored black suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. Dark hair, neatly cut. Early 40s, perhaps. Controlled in a way that suggested nothing about him was accidental. The men behind him remained near the entrance, spreading subtly along the perimeter without blocking anyone's path. Staff stiffened instinctively. But the man did not address them. He didn't look toward the administrative office. He didn't ask for directions. His gaze moved across the lobby once, slow, measured, and then it fixed down the corridor, toward room 12. Sophia felt the shift before she understood it. He wasn't here for a donor meeting. He wasn't here for publicity. He was here with purpose. She stepped back into her grandfather's room just as the man began walking down the hall. "No," she said softly, instinctive protectiveness rising in her chest. "We have a visitor." Leonardo blinked awake slowly. "Visitor?" he echoed faintly. Sophia positioned herself slightly between the doorway and the armchair. She told herself she was overreacting, but when the man reached the threshold, he did not hesitate. He stopped, looked directly at her grandfather. Not at her. Not at the room. At Leonardo Marino. The air shifted. The facility's muted sounds felt distant now. Sophia met his gaze cautiously. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping her tone polite but firm. He didn't answer her immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the elderly man in the armchair. There was no confusion in them. No uncertainty. Recognition. He stepped into the room without asking permission. Not aggressively. Just deliberately. Sophia's pulse quickened. "Excuse me," she said, sharper now. "This is a private—" But the man finally looked at her. His expression was calm. "I won't be long," he said evenly. His voice was low, controlled, not loud, but it carried weight. She felt it in her chest. Behind him, one of the suited men remained just outside the doorway, posture relaxed but alert. Leonardo shifted slightly in his chair. His eyes, usually clouded with hesitation when meeting new faces, sharpened. He stared at the man. Really stared. Sophia saw something she hadn't seen in weeks. Focus. The man took one step closer, close enough that the afternoon light from the window caught the faint scar near his jawline. Close enough that his presence filled the small room without needing to expand. Sophia's protective instinct flared. "My grandfather isn't well," she said quietly. "If you're looking for someone else..." The man ignored her again. He stopped directly in front of Leonardo and waited. The silence stretched thin. Leonardo's fingers, which had been resting loosely on the armrest, tightened slightly. His back straightened. Not fully, but enough. Sophia's heart began to pound. She had seen her grandfather struggle to remember her name that morning, struggle to recall the year, struggle to recognize the nurse who had brought his medication for months. And yet now his eyes were clear, unmistakably clear. The man inclined his head just slightly, not in deference, in acknowledgement. And for the first time since the diagnosis, Sophia saw something flicker in her grandfather's expression that wasn't confusion. It was memory, not recent, not fragile, old, deep, dangerous in its clarity. The unexpected visitor hadn't come by accident. He hadn't chosen the wrong room. He hadn't mistaken identity. He had walked into the facility with purpose, and that purpose was sitting in an armchair by the window. Her grandfather's lips parted. Sophia felt the air leave her lungs, because whatever he was about to say, it wasn't going to be confusion. The room held its breath. Sophia stood frozen between the doorway and her grandfather's chair, her pulse thudding in her ears. The man in the tailored suit remained still, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes fixed on Leonardo as if waiting for something that had been decades in the making. Leonardo's fingers tightened around the armrests. His spine straightened, not with the stiffness of confusion, but with intention. Sophia had watched him struggle all morning to remember whether he had eaten breakfast. He had called her by her mother's name twice. He had asked what year it was. Now his gaze was sharp, focused, unclouded. He leaned forward slightly, and then, in a voice that did not tremble, did not hesitate, did not search for words, he spoke. "Matteo Vieri." The name landed cleanly in the air, perfect pronunciation, perfect certainty. Sophia felt something cold slide down her spine. For a second, she wondered if she had imagined it. Her grandfather had not spoken that clearly in weeks, but he said it again. "Matteo Vieri," Leonardo repeated, eyes steady. "You've grown into your father's shoulders." The man, Matteo Vieri, did not smile, but something shifted in his expression. Respect, and something almost like relief. "You remember me," Matteo said quietly. Leonardo's lips curved faintly. "I remember everything that matters." Sophia's breath caught. Everything that matters. Her mind raced. 3 days ago, he had forgotten the name of the facility. Yesterday, he had asked if his own sister was coming to dinner, a woman who had been gone for 40 years. And now he was recognizing a man she had never heard of with the clarity of a formal introduction. "How..." Sophia began, her voice barely steady. "Nonno?" Leonardo did not look at her, not yet. His eyes remained locked on Matteo. "You shouldn't have come here," Leonardo said evenly. Matteo inclined his head slightly. "I had to see for myself." "For what?" Leonardo asked. "That you were still here." The exchange felt layered with something Sophia couldn't fully decode. Still here. Not alive. Not breathing. Here. Present. Leonardo's gaze sharpened further. "You came without permission," he said. It wasn't a question. Mateo's jaw tightened faintly. I came with respect. Sophia stepped forward, heart pounding. My grandfather has dementia, she said, her words tumbling out. He doesn't. He does, Mateo interrupted softly, without looking at her. At least when it counts. The confidence in his voice unsettled her more than aggression would have. Leonardo slowly turned his head toward Sophia then. For the first time in days, when he looked at her, there was no confusion. Sophia, he said clearly. Her throat tightened. Yes, he held her gaze steadily. This is Matteo Vieri. The introduction felt formal, deliberate, not accidental. How do you know him? She asked, barely above a whisper. Leonardo's eyes returned to Matteo. I trained his father, he said. The words hit like a quiet detonation. Trained. Father. Her mind scrambled to connect pieces she didn't yet understand. Matteo stepped closer, but not aggressively, carefully, as if approaching something fragile but powerful. My father spoke of you often, he said. Leonardo Marino. The only man he ever called capo, without resentment. The title lingered in the air. Capo. Sophia's stomach dropped. She had heard stories from other families, rumors of old neighborhoods, whispered legends of men who once held power before vanishing into civilian life, but never connected to her grandfather. Never like this. Leonardo exhaled slowly. Your father was reckless, he said calmly, but loyal. Matteo allowed the faintest hint of a smile. He was both. Sophia felt the room tilt. You're telling me, she said, her voice tightening, that he remembers this? Matteo finally looked at her fully. Yes. But he forgot, she faltered. He forgot my birthday last week. Memory is not linear, Matteo replied. It does not disappear evenly. Leonardo shifted in his chair, gaze still unwavering. I forget what day it is, he said quietly, but I do not forget blood. The word landed heavy. Sophia's pulse quickened. What does that mean? She asked. Leonardo's eyes flicked briefly toward her. It means some memories are carved deeper than others. Matteo nodded once. Your grandfather saved my father's life, he said calmly. The room seemed to shrink. And when a man does that, Matteo continued, you do not forget his face. Sophia felt her breath leave her. For weeks she had watched her grandfather slip in and out of recognition. She had believed the disease was erasing him entirely. Now she was witnessing something else. Selective clarity. A part of him untouched. No, she whispered, stepping closer. You remember him? Leonardo's gaze softened when it returned to her. I remember who I was, he said. The statement carried weight. For the first time since the diagnosis, Sophia realized something unsettling. Her grandfather's mind was not simply unraveling. Parts of it were locked, preserved, tied to something far older than her. And whatever that past was, it had just walked through the door. The name changed everything. Matteo Vieri did not move for a full second after Leonardo spoke it. It wasn't hesitation. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. The air inside room 12 felt heavier, as if something ancient and unresolved had just been pulled into the present. Sophia could hear the faint trickle of the courtyard fountain through the cracked window, but even that seemed distant now. Leonardo sat upright in his armchair, his posture firmer than Sophia had seen in weeks. His hands, usually trembling slightly, were steady. Matteo stood directly in front of him, and for the first time since entering the facility, he looked caught off guard. Not threatened, recognized. Outside the room, a nurse paused mid-step. Sophia noticed it from the corner of her eye. The hallway had grown quieter. Staff members were no longer pretending not to stare. They were watching openly now, because something had shifted. It wasn't just that an elderly man had spoken clearly. It was the way he had spoken, with authority, with familiarity, with rank. Capo, Matteo said quietly. The title wasn't loud, but it carried. The nurse in the hallway stilled completely. Sophia felt her pulse spike. She had heard that word before, whispered in old stories, usually attached to crime documentaries or news headlines. Not inside a memory care facility, not directed at her grandfather. Leonardo did not smile.
You should not use that word here,
He said evenly. Matteo inclined his head slightly, but he did not retract it. Respect does not vanish because the walls are different, he replied. Sophia felt her stomach tighten. This was not coincidence. This was not a wealthy donor wandering into the wrong room. Matteo had come here knowing exactly who he would find. And he had not expected confusion. He had expected recognition. The nurses were fully aware now. 2 of them stood at the end of the corridor, whispering urgently. Is that? It can't be. Sophia didn't know what name they were thinking. But she knew the tone. Reputation. Matteo's men remained stationed near the entrance, their presence no longer subtle. They hadn't drawn weapons. They hadn't raised voices. But the space around them was controlled, contained. Sophia stepped closer to her grandfather, her hand instinctively resting on the arm of his chair. This isn't random, she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. Matteo's eyes flicked toward her. No, he said calmly. It isn't. The honesty unsettled her more than deflection would have. You knew he would remember you, she said. I hoped. Leonardo let out a faint, dry breath. I do not forget debt, he said. The word echoed. Debt. The nurses were no longer pretending not to listen. Sophia saw one of them discreetly step toward the reception desk, likely informing administration that something unusual was happening. Matteo remained composed. You remember that night, he said to Leonardo. It wasn't phrased as a question. Leonardo's gaze sharpened further. Which one? He asked. The tone carried something Sophia had never heard directed at her before. Challenge. Matteo did not flinch. The docks, he said quietly. The room seemed to shrink. Leonardo's jaw tightened faintly. Sophia felt the shift in her grandfather's breathing, not labored, not confused, focused. You were a boy, Leonardo said. I was 22, Matteo replied. A boy, Leonardo repeated firmly. One of the nurses gasped softly outside the doorway. Sophia turned slightly, just enough to see that the entire corridor had slowed. Residents being wheeled past were redirected gently. Staff stood back, uncertain whether to intervene or remain invisible. Because even they could sense it now. This was not an argument. It was history resurfacing. Matteo took one measured step closer. You pulled my father out before the explosion, he said quietly. The word explosion sent a cold ripple through Sophia's spine. Leonardo's eyes did not waver. And you remember that? Matteo pressed. Leonardo's voice was steady. I remember who was worth saving. Silence dropped into the room like a weight. Matteo's expression hardened briefly. Not with offense, but with understanding. You could have left him, he said. I do not leave my own, Leonardo replied. The certainty in his tone was unmistakable. Sophia felt her world tilt slightly. This wasn't a fading man grasping at scattered memories. This was deliberate recall. Selective. Precise. You came here because you heard he was ill, Sophia said quietly. Yes, Matteo replied. And you needed to know if he was still himself. Matteo held her gaze. Yes! The word confirmed everything. He had not come to intimidate. He had not come by accident. He had come to measure whether the man who once commanded his loyalty was still present beneath the diagnosis. And he had found his answer. The room remained silent. Not awkward. Reverent. Sophia looked at her grandfather, the man who had forgotten the day of the week that morning, and she realized something unsettling. His memory wasn't simply disappearing. It was protecting something. And whatever Matteo Vieri represented, it wasn't a random visitor. It was a past powerful enough to cut through dementia, and that meant it had never truly faded at all. The silence in the room did not break all at once. It shifted, settled, deepened. Leonardo's back remained straight in the armchair, the confusion that usually clouded his gaze nowhere to be found. Sophia stood beside him, her hand still resting lightly on the fabric of his sleeve, as if contact alone could anchor this moment. Matteo Vieri did not look like a man accustomed to being unsettled. Yet something in his posture had changed, not weakened, but sharpened. "You carry your father's eyes," Leonardo said calmly. Matteo inclined his head slightly. "And you carry your title," he replied. Sophia's pulse thudded. Title. She had heard the word capo already, but now something heavier hovered in the air. Leonardo's gaze did not waver. "You are Capo's son," he said clearly. The phrase landed with weight. Not Matteo Vieri, not a stranger in a suit. Capo's son. The formal acknowledgement was unmistakable. Sophia felt the shift in the hallway again, the nurses outside stiffening at the tone alone, even if they didn't understand the meaning. Matteo's jaw tightened faintly. "My father would have been honored to hear that," he said quietly. Leonardo gave the faintest nod. "He was not always wise," he replied, "but he was loyal." Sophia's mind raced. "You knew his father," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Leonardo finally turned his eyes toward her, and when he looked at her now, there was no haze. "No," he said calmly. "I commanded him." The words hit harder than any raised voice. Sophia's breath caught. Commanded. Her grandfather, the man who struggled to button his own coat last week, had once commanded men like Matteo Vieri's father. Matteo did not contradict him. He did not soften the statement. He simply stood with quiet acknowledgement. "Your grandfather was not a soldier," Matteo said, his gaze briefly shifting to Sophia. "He was a leader." The word hung in the air. Leader. Sophia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "In what?" she demanded, though she already sensed the answer. Leonardo did not flinch. "In structure," he said calmly. "In order." Matteo's voice followed, even and controlled. "In an organization that governed more than streets." The clarity of that sentence chilled her. "You're saying he was—" She faltered, unable to finish it. Leonardo spared her the struggle. "I held rank," he said. The admission was not proud, it was not ashamed, it was factual. "Capo regime," Matteo added quietly. The term felt foreign and heavy. Sophia had heard it only in crime dramas, whispered with reverence or fear. She looked at her grandfather again, searching for contradiction. There was none. "You were part of that world?" she asked softly. Leonardo's gaze returned to Matteo. "For a long time," he said. Matteo stepped slightly closer, though still respectful of the space. "There was a time," he said to Sophia, "when your grandfather's word carried more weight than any signature." The nurses in the hallway had retreated, but Sophia could feel the shift through the walls. Whispers. Speculation. None of them understood what was unfolding, but they felt it. "So when you call him Capo," she said slowly, "it's not nostalgia." "No," Matteo replied. "It's recognition." Leonardo exhaled softly. "I left that life," he said firmly. "And yet," Matteo said quietly, "it never left you." The truth of that vibrated in the air. Sophia's mind reeled. "You forgot my birthday," she said suddenly to her grandfather. "You forgot where you live." Leonardo's gaze softened when it returned to her. "Yes. But you remember this?" His answer was steady. "Some things are carved deeper." Matteo nodded once. "Rank," he said quietly, "is not erased by illness." Sophia felt a strange mixture of anger and awe. "You hid this from me," she whispered. Leonardo held her gaze. "I buried it." "Why?" "To keep it from shaping you." Matteo did not interrupt. He stood in silent confirmation. "You weren't just some man who retired quietly," Sophia continued, her voice trembling slightly. "You were powerful." Leonardo's lips curved faintly. "Power is loud," he said. "Leaving it is louder." The phrase felt familiar, like something he had once said before. Matteo studied him with something close to reverence.
There were men who would not challenge him, he said to Sophia, not because they feared him, because they respected him.
The distinction mattered. Sophia's world felt like it was rearranging itself in real time.
The grandfather who taught her to tie her shoes.
The man who once commanded an organization powerful enough that its successor now stood in a memory care facility with visible deference. She looked at Matteo. "You came here because of that," she said.
Yes. You didn't come to intimidate.
No. You came to see if the man who once led still remembered who he was. Matteo's gaze sharpened slightly. Yes. Sophia looked back at Leonardo. His shoulders were still squared, his eyes clear. Not confused, not lost. In that moment, she saw something she hadn't expected. Dementia had taken many things, but it had not taken his rank, and it had not taken the loyalty attached to it. "Capo's son," Leonardo repeated quietly to Matteo. The acknowledgement wasn't casual, it was formal. A recognition of lineage, of continuity. Sophia realized then that this wasn't just about the past resurfacing. It was about a legacy that had never fully faded. And whatever world her grandfather had left behind, it still remembered him. The room felt smaller now, not because of the walls, but because of the weight of what was unspoken. Sophia stood between her grandfather and Matteo Vieri, her pulse still uneven from the revelation of titles and rank. The nurses had withdrawn fully from the doorway, leaving the three of them in a silence that felt deliberate. Leonardo's gaze remained steady, though a faint tremor had returned to his hands. The moment of sharp clarity had not faded, but it required effort now. As if he were holding something heavy in place, Matteo broke the silence first. "There was a night at the docks," he said quietly. Leonardo's jaw tightened slightly. "I remember," he replied. Sophia felt her breath slow, instinctively bracing for something she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. "My father wasn't meant to survive that meeting," Matteo continued. "The arrangement was already made." The calmness in his voice made the words heavier, not lighter. "Arrangement?" Sophia echoed faintly. "Betrayal," Matteo clarified. Leonardo's eyes did not waver. "There is always betrayal," he said evenly. Matteo gave a faint nod, but not always warning. Sophia looked between them. "You're saying someone tried to kill his father," she said slowly.
"Yes," Matteo replied. "And you knew?"
Leonardo exhaled softly. "I discovered it an hour before the shipment arrived." Sophia's heart thudded. "What did you do?" she asked. Leonardo didn't answer immediately. Matteo did. "He walked into the warehouse knowing the gunmen were already positioned," he said. "He didn't send anyone else." Sophia's stomach tightened. "He could have let it happen," Matteo continued. "No one would have questioned it. My father was ambitious, visible, a threat to men who preferred quieter leadership." Leonardo's voice was steady. "He was loyal." "He was," Matteo agreed, "and loyalty deserved warning." Sophia's throat felt dry. "You risked your life," she said quietly to her grandfather. Leonardo looked at her then, fully. "I risked my position," he corrected gently. Matteo's eyes hardened slightly.
"You did more than that."
He took a small step closer, lowering his voice as if the walls themselves might carry memory. "When the first shot was fired," Matteo said, "you pushed him out of the line of fire." Sophia felt the air leave her lungs. "You were hit," Matteo added. Leonardo's expression did not change. "It was not fatal," he said simply.
"But it could have been,"
Matteo replied. Silence settled again. Sophia looked down at her grandfather's shoulder instinctively, as if she might see a scar through fabric and time. "You never told me," she whispered. "There are many things I never told you," Leonardo said quietly. Matteo's gaze shifted briefly toward Sophia.
"After that night, everything changed," he said. "How?" she asked. "Your grandfather had the loyalty of men who valued strength," Matteo explained. But after the docks, he had something else.
Gratitude, Leonardo muttered.
Power,
Matteo corrected. Sophia swallowed hard.
And then?
She asked. Leonardo leaned back slightly in the armchair, as if the memory itself required distance. And then I left, he said.
Just like that?
Sophia pressed. Matteo shook his head faintly. No one leaves just like that. Leonardo's gaze drifted briefly toward the window, toward the courtyard fountain. I realized something that night, he said slowly. If men were willing to betray for position, they would one day betray for blood. Sophia's chest tightened. Blood, she repeated.
Family,
Matteo clarified. Leonardo nodded once.
I had already chosen my successor, he said quietly, glancing at Matteo. And I had already seen what ambition could do.
Matteo did not look offended. He looked understanding.
You vanished, Matteo said.
I stepped down, Leonardo corrected. Without explanation, Matteo replied. There was explanation, Leonardo said calmly. It was simply not public. Sophia's voice trembled slightly. Why didn't you tell anyone? Leonardo looked at her, and for a brief moment, she saw both the leader he once was and the grandfather who had taught her to bake almond cookies. Because leaving publicly invites challenge, he said. Leaving quietly ends conflict. Matteo's jaw tightened faintly. There were rumors, he said, that you were forced out, that you had grown weak. Leonardo's lips curved slightly.
And did you believe them?
No, Matteo answered immediately. Sophia felt her pulse in her throat. So you came here, she said slowly, because you heard he was ill, and you needed to know if that rumor had become true. Matteo met her gaze directly. Yes. The honesty struck harder than anything else.
I needed to know whether the man who saved my father was still present, he continued, or if illness had erased him.
Leonardo let out a faint breath that might have been a laugh. Erased? He repeated softly. Matteo's expression softened just slightly. It hasn't, he said. Sophia stood very still. Her grandfather, the man who sometimes forgot her name, had once stepped into gunfire, had once held power strong enough that its absence reshaped an organization, had once vanished, not because he was defeated, but because he chose to. You saved his father, she whispered. Leonardo's gaze remained steady. I saved a man who deserved saving. Matteo inclined his head.
And then you walked away without asking for anything in return.
I had what I needed, Leonardo replied. Sophia felt her chest tighten. She understood now. He hadn't vanished out of fear. He hadn't been pushed aside. He had left deliberately. And whatever world he had stepped away from, it had never forgotten the debt. After Matteo left, the room felt different. Not emptier. Rearranged. Sophia sat beside her grandfather long after the black cars disappeared from the front drive. The nurses resumed their routine carefully, as if unsure whether to treat the moment as an interruption, or an event they would later whisper about during break. Leonardo leaned back in his armchair, eyes half closed. For a few minutes, he looked tired, older. The tremor returned faintly to his hands. Are you okay? Sophia asked softly. He opened one eye.
I am 83, he replied dryly. Of course I am not okay.
Despite herself, she smiled faintly, but her mind was racing. Matteo had not come to intimidate. He had come to verify, and he had found something. Clarity. Memory. Recognition sharper than anything Sophia had seen in weeks. Nonno, she said gently. How did you remember him? Leonardo's gaze drifted toward the window. Remember who? The shift was subtle. Too subtle. She leaned forward slightly. Matteo Vieri, she said carefully. Leonardo blinked. The sharpness in his eyes flickered.
Visitor,
he asked. Her chest tightened. Just minutes ago he had spoken Matteo's name with precision, had recounted events at the docks, had held rank in his posture. Now he looked uncertain again, Yes, she said quietly. The visitor. He looked down at his hands. Did I know him? Sophia swallowed hard. You said you did. A faint crease formed between his brows. He murmured. Maybe. She studied him carefully. Was this the illness reclaiming ground? Or something else? Over the next few days, she paid closer attention. When nurses entered the room, Leonardo often appeared distracted, confused, compliant in the way they expected. He forgot the lunch menu, forgot which nurse had worked the morning shift. But when Sophia mentioned the docks, casually, carefully, his gaze sharpened again.
You were always too curious,
He said once, almost amused. The clarity lasted only seconds before it dissolved into haze. Doctors called it fluctuation. Dementia is unpredictable, the neurologist reminded her gently during a follow-up appointment. Patients can experience moments of lucidity, especially when emotionally stimulated.
Emotionally stimulated.
The phrase lingered in her mind. She began testing something quietly. When she brought up childhood memories, her first bicycle, the summer they painted the kitchen, his responses were fragmented. But when she mentioned structure, discipline, loyalty, he listened. His fingers would still. His back would straighten almost imperceptibly. One afternoon, she leaned closer. Capo, she said softly. The reaction was immediate. His eyes snapped to hers, not confused, not lost, alert. You should not use that word carelessly, he said evenly. Her heart pounded. You remember that? She whispered. Leonardo studied her face carefully. I remember who I was, he said. And who were you? She asked. Silence. Then slowly the tremor returned.
I was a man,
he said vaguely. The moment passed, but Sophia felt it clearly. This wasn't randomness. This wasn't simple deterioration. Certain memories were intact, guarded, preserved. As if tucked behind a door he only opened deliberately. She began watching him more closely during visits from staff. When administrators entered his room, discussing medication adjustments as if he weren't present, Leonardo's gaze would drift, compliant. But when Matteo returned, unexpectedly, briefly, 2 days later, the shift was undeniable. Before Matteo even spoke, Leonardo's posture changed. He knew. You came back, Leonardo said calmly. Sophia's breath caught. There had been no introduction this time, no prompting. Matteo inclined his head slightly. I needed to confirm something, he replied. Leonardo's eyes held his.
You confirmed it.
The exchange was brief, controlled, but clear. After Matteo left again, Sophia sat very still. The diagnosis said dementia. The scans showed cognitive decline. The doctors described memory loss in stages, but what she was witnessing felt layered, selective, intentional. No, she said quietly. Are you pretending sometimes? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her with a gaze that was neither fully clear nor entirely lost. Pretending? He echoed faintly. To forget. A long pause, and then softly. There are things safer to forget. The words were quiet, measured, not confused. Sophia's heart pounded. Safer for who? She asked. For you, he replied. Her breath caught. In that moment, she understood something unsettling. Maybe dementia had taken parts of him. Maybe confusion was real. But maybe, just maybe, silence had once been a survival skill, and habits like that did not vanish easily. Doctors could explain brain deterioration. They could chart cognitive decline, but they could not measure will. And Sophia was beginning to suspect that her grandfather's mind was not simply unraveling. Parts of it were still disciplined, still strategic, still choosing what to reveal. Memory wasn't entirely gone. It was guarded. The story traveled faster than Sophia expected. It didn't appear in newspapers. It wasn't whispered on television panels. But within 48 hours of Mateo's visit, the atmosphere around Riverview Memory Care had shifted. Sophia noticed it first in small ways. A car parked across the street longer than necessary. A man pretending to take a phone call near the entrance, his gaze drifting too often toward the windows. The receptionist asking unusual questions about visitor logs. Inside the facility, nothing had changed. Outside, everything had. Mateo's presence had not gone unnoticed. Men like him did not arrive quietly in places like this without someone reporting it, and someone always reported it. When Sophia arrived that afternoon, she saw a black sedan idling near the far corner of the lot. Not Mateo's. Different model. Different posture. Not protective. Observing. Her chest tightened. She pushed through the front doors, forcing her expression neutral. Leonardo sat in his usual chair, sunlight casting soft shadows across his face. He looked smaller today, thinner somehow. But when she entered, his eyes lifted instantly. "You're late," he said. She blinked. It wasn't true, but it was sharp. "I'm on time," she replied gently. He studied her for a moment, then gave a faint nod as if accepting correction. "You saw them," he said quietly. The words froze her. "Who?" she asked carefully. He didn't answer directly. "Old ghosts walk when names are spoken," he murmured. Her pulse quickened. "They're watching," she said. Leonardo's fingers tapped faintly against the armrest. "They always watch," he replied. The air felt heavier. Later that evening, Mateo called. "You've noticed," he said without greeting. "Yes." "There were inquiries today," he continued. "Quiet ones." "Inquiries about what?" "Whether Leonardo Marino is capable of speech." The phrasing chilled her. "Speech?" she echoed. "Lucidity," Mateo clarified. "Decision-making capacity." Sophia felt anger flare. "He's in a memory care facility," she said sharply. "What do they think he's going to do?" "Symbolism matters more than action," Mateo replied evenly. The truth of that unsettled her. An aging man with fading memory should not have been threatening. But a respected former leader, publicly acknowledged by Matteo Vieri, was something else entirely. "They think you're vulnerable," she said. "They think he is," Matteo corrected. Silence stretched between them. "What happens if they decide that?" she asked. "They test boundaries." Her stomach tightened. The next morning, the test came. A nurse entered Leonardo's room holding a small envelope. "It was delivered at reception," she said softly. "No return address." Sophia's heart pounded as she took it. Inside was a single photograph. Leonardo in his armchair. Taken from the courtyard. Recent. Her hands trembled. Leonardo looked at the image calmly. "They are impatient," he said. "You're not surprised," she whispered. He gave the faintest smile. "Age does not make one invisible." Sophia swallowed hard. "This is because of Mateo." "No," Leonardo replied evenly. "It is because of memory." The word echoed. That afternoon, Mateo arrived again, this time without announcement. His presence in the hallway quieted staff once more. "They've confirmed your grandfather is aware," he said calmly. "Of what?" Sophia demanded. "Of who he was." Her chest tightened. "They don't believe the illness has erased him," Mateo continued. "They believe he is feigning weakness." Sophia felt fury rise. "He forgets my name some days," she said. "He can't remember the year." Mateo's gaze was steady. "They are not measuring years," he replied. "They are measuring influence." Leonardo watched the exchange with quiet clarity. "They want to see if I will speak," he said softly. Sophia turned to him. "Speak about what?" "Loyalty," he replied. Mateo's jaw tightened faintly. "If word spreads that Capo Marino is lucid," he said, "old alliances could shift." "And if word spreads that he is fading?" Sophia asked. "Then he becomes leverage," Mateo answered. The room fell silent. Leverage.
An elderly man with trembling hands and intermittent memory loss, reduced to strategy.
Sophia looked at her grandfather, the man who once pushed her on a swing, who forgot his keys, who sometimes asked what city they were in. To others, he was a symbol. To her, he was family. They think because he's old, he's weak, she said quietly.
They hope so, Matteo replied.
Outside the window, she noticed another unfamiliar vehicle slow along the street, not lingering, just passing, but watching. The past was not just resurfacing, it was attracting attention. Rivals who had once bowed to Leonardo's authority now saw opportunity in his frailty, or what they believed was frailty. Sophia felt something settle inside her, not fear this time. Clarity. This wasn't random. It wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. Leonardo leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes half closed again, the tremor returning faintly to his hands. To anyone watching casually, he looked fragile, lost. But Sophia knew better now.
Rivals had resurfaced.
And they were underestimating the man they thought was fading. The black cars did not park directly in front of the facility this time. They positioned themselves one street over, close enough to respond, far enough to appear uninvolved. Sophia noticed immediately. She also noticed the second vehicle across from the nursing home that did not belong to Matteo. 2 sets of watchers, 2 different intentions. Matteo stood in Leonardo's room, hands clasped loosely behind his back, gaze steady on the courtyard beyond the window. They will escalate, he said calmly. Sophia folded her arms. You say that like it's inevitable. It is, he replied. Leonardo sat in his armchair, eyes half-lidded, appearing detached from the conversation. To anyone unfamiliar, he would have seemed unaware. Sophia knew better. You can't turn this place into a fortress, she said. I won't, Matteo answered. But you will put men outside. Yes. Her jaw tightened. This is a nursing home. There are families here. Residents who don't know anything about your world. My world did not come here uninvited, Matteo replied evenly. It followed a name. That name belongs to my grandfather, she shot back. And that name carries weight, he said. Silence stretched. Leonardo's fingers tapped faintly against the armrest, a subtle rhythm Sophia had learned meant he was listening carefully. You're offering protection, she said slowly. Yes. Or control. Matteo finally looked at her directly. Those are not the same thing. They blur, she replied. His expression remained composed. I will not interfere with daily operations, he said. No armed men inside, no intimidation. Just outside, she said. Yes. The honesty was infuriating. You think I don't see what this becomes? She continued. Cars at the curb. Men watching the entrance. Rumors spreading faster. Rumors are already spreading, Matteo said quietly. She hated that he was right. The photograph had been deliberate. The car outside was deliberate. Every move now would be measured. You're reacting, she said.
I am preventing,
he corrected. Leonardo shifted slightly in his chair. You speak as if I am an asset, he said softly. Matteo's posture straightened. You are a respected elder, he replied. In your world, Leonardo said.
In any world, Matteo answered.
Sophia stepped closer to her grandfather. He doesn't need guards, she said firmly. He needs peace. And peace requires security, Matteo replied. No, she said. Peace requires distance from all of this. That is no longer an option, he said calmly. Her pulse spiked. You don't get to decide that. I am not deciding, Matteo said. I am responding. She felt anger flare. You're responding because of loyalty, she said. Because he saved your father. Yes. And now that debt makes him a symbol again. Matteo did not deny it. Yes. Leonardo let out a faint breath that might have been amusement. Symbols are dangerous, he murmured. Only when unguarded, Matteo replied. Sophia's chest tightened. You're not listening, she said. This place is fragile. These residents are fragile.
My men will not disturb them.
They don't have to, she replied. Presence alone changes atmosphere. Mateo studied her carefully.
You fear escalation?
I fear turning him into leverage, she said quietly. Silence settled. The word lingered. Leverage. Mateo's gaze shifted to Leonardo.
No one will touch him,
he said.
That is not the same as no one trying,
Sophia replied. Her grandfather's eyes opened fully now.
Enough,
he said quietly. Both of them turned. Leonardo's gaze was clear. Not clouded, not confused.
You argue as if I am absent,
he continued. Sophia swallowed. You're not, she said softly. Mateo inclined his head slightly.
I do not intend to control you,
he said to Leonardo.
I know,
Leonardo replied.
Then what do you intend?
Sophia asked. Mateo's voice remained steady. To make it clear that illness does not equal weakness.
The phrase landed heavily.
Sophia looked at her grandfather, the tremor in his hands, the soft lines around his eyes. Weakness was visible, but so was something else. Legacy. You put guards outside, she said slowly. And what happens when someone decides to test that line?
They will regret it, Mateo answered.
The certainty in his tone chilled her. I don't want regret, she said. I want quiet.
Quiet is earned, he replied.
Leonardo exhaled softly. She fears you will bring war to her door, he said. Mateo's gaze remained steady.
I bring deterrence.
Sophia felt exhaustion creeping into her bones. This isn't just about safety, she said quietly. It's about image. Yes, Mateo admitted. And image is dangerous. So is vulnerability, he replied. The room fell silent again. Outside, the unfamiliar car idled. Mateo's men remained unseen but present. Two forces orbiting a memory care facility. This was supposed to be simple, Sophia whispered. Visits, medication, gradual loss. Life rarely follows simple lines, Mateo said. She looked at her grandfather. Do you want this? She asked him. Leonardo considered for a long moment. Then he said calmly, I want you safe. The answer cut through everything else. Sophia felt her resistance waver, not because she trusted Mateo's world, but because she understood something now. The danger did not begin with guards. It began the moment a name was spoken clearly. Protection or control. The line was thin, and whether she liked it or not. They were already standing on it. The night it happened, there were no black cars outside. No unfamiliar vehicles idling at the curb. The street beyond Riverview Memory Care was unusually quiet, washed in soft amber from the streetlights. Sophia had stayed later than usual. Her grandfather had been restless that afternoon, pacing what little distance his room allowed, muttering fragments under his breath, confusing nurses' names, and insisting he had a meeting to attend. But now, as evening settled, he was still. Too still. She sat beside his bed, the small lamp casting a warm circle of light over the blanket folded neatly at his waist. No, she said softly. He opened his eyes slowly, and this time there was no haze. No delay, just recognition. Sophia, he said clearly. Her breath caught.
Yes.
He studied her face for a long moment as if committing it to memory. You are tired, he said. She almost laughed. I'm fine. No, he replied gently. You are carrying something heavy. The clarity in his tone made her chest tighten. I can carry it, she whispered. He shifted slightly, wincing as he adjusted against the pillows. I did not leave that life because I was afraid for myself, he said quietly. Her pulse quickened. You left because of me, she replied. Yes, he said, but not only. She leaned forward, afraid the moment might slip away. Then why? She asked. Leonardo's gaze drifted toward the window, toward the darkened courtyard. I saw what happens when men mistake power for permanence, he said slowly. His voice was steady, measured. I saw boys younger than you standing guard with guns they did not understand, he continued. I saw wives watched from across streets. I saw children used to send messages. Sophia's throat tightened. You never told me that, she whispered. I did not want you imagining those images, he replied. His fingers tightened faintly against the blanket. There was a night, he said, after the docks. After I saved Mateo's father, I stood in a warehouse that smelled of smoke and blood. The words felt heavy in the quiet room. I looked at the men around me, he continued. Men who would follow me into anything. Men who believed loyalty was enough to justify destruction. She swallowed hard. And it wasn't? She asked. Loyalty without limits becomes cruelty, he said softly. The statement felt carved from something deep. I had built something powerful, he went on. Structured, disciplined. But I could not control ambition. I could not control greed. His gaze returned to her. And I could not control what that world would demand of a daughter. Her eyes burned. You think they would have come for me? They would have, he said calmly. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. They would have watched you walk to school, he continued, followed you to markets, used your name to move pieces on a board you did not choose. Her breath trembled. So you walked away? Yes. Was it easy? She asked. Leonardo let out a faint breath that might have been a laugh. Nothing about leaving power is easy. Did they try to stop you? Yes. Her heart pounded. And? I reminded them, he said quietly, that respect runs both ways. She searched his face. You threatened them. I warned them. Silence settled between them. You gave it all up, she whispered. I gave up authority, he corrected gently. Not myself. She felt tears slip down her cheeks. I was so angry, she admitted, when I learned who you were. He looked at her with calm understanding. You deserved honesty. I thought you didn't trust me. He reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly steady. I trusted you enough to want better for you. The room felt impossibly still. I promised your grandmother, he said quietly, the night she told me she was pregnant. Her heart skipped. What promise? That our child would grow up untouched by blood. The word hung heavy. I broke many promises in my life, he continued, but not that one. She squeezed his hand. You protected me. Yes, even from yourself. He gave the faintest nod. For a long time. She studied him, the lines of age, the fragility of his body, the strength still present in his gaze. Are you pretending sometimes? She asked softly. A faint smile touched his lips. A man learns to choose silence carefully. That was not denial, it was confirmation. You remember more than you let on, she whispered. Memory is not the same as confession, he replied gently. The clarity began to dim slightly around the edges of his eyes. She felt it slipping. No, she said quickly. Are you afraid? He looked at her fully one last time. No, he said, because you are not alone. The tremor returned to his hands. His gaze softened. Is it morning? He asked suddenly. Her heart cracked. Not yet, she said gently. He nodded faintly, already drifting. The moment of clarity faded like mist under sunlight. But Sophia remained seated, his words echoing inside her. He had not left because he was weak. He had left because he understood what power demanded, and he had chosen her over it. The past had not been abandoned. It had been sacrificed. And that, she realized, was a different kind of strength. The threat did not arrive loudly. It arrived in flowers. A large arrangement was delivered to Riverview Memory Care late Friday morning. White lilies. Expensive. Formal. The kind usually sent for condolences. There was no card inside. Only a single strip of paper tucked beneath the ribbon.
We remember.
Sophia stared at it in the administrative office while the receptionist hovered nervously nearby. No sender? Sophia asked. The receptionist shook her head. It was left at the desk. Leonardo sat in his wheelchair by the window when she returned to his room, the bouquet resting temporarily on the small table beside him. He looked at the flowers, then at her.
They are impatient,
he said quietly. Her pulse tightened. It's intimidation, she replied.
No,
he corrected softly. It is acknowledgement. She didn't like the distinction. Within an hour, Matteo arrived. This time, he did not remain discreet. 2 black vehicles parked directly in front of the facility entrance. Not aggressive, not chaotic, but unmistakable. Staff straightened automatically as he entered the lobby. Conversations quieted. Residents paused mid-step in the hallway. Visibility. Deliberate. Sophia stood beside her grandfather's chair as Matteo stepped into the room. His gaze moved briefly to the flowers, then to Leonardo. They are testing symbolism, he said calmly. They have already tested proximity, Sophia replied. Matteo inclined his head faintly.
And now they test perception.
Leonardo's eyes were clearer than usual. Perception, he repeated. Matteo stepped forward, not towering, not looming, and did something Sophia did not expect. He lowered himself to one knee beside the wheelchair. The movement was controlled, intentional, not theatrical. He did not take Leonardo's hand this time. He bowed his head slightly. Capo Marino, he said clearly. The nurses outside the room stiffened. The title echoed through the hallway. Leonardo's spine straightened almost imperceptibly.
You are too visible,
he murmured. I am meant to be, Matteo replied. Sophia's breath caught. This was not a private gesture. The door remained open. Staff, residents, visitors, they could all see. Matteo rose slowly and positioned himself beside Leonardo's chair, one hand resting lightly on the back of it. Not possessive. Protective. He turned toward the corridor where curious eyes lingered.
Leonardo Marino,
he said, voice steady but carrying,
is a respected elder. His name is not a question.
The silence in the hallway deepened. No threats, no raised voices, just acknowledgement. Anyone watching would understand the message. This was not a fading old man abandoned by time. This was a man whose legacy was still claimed. Sophia felt the weight of it settle. You're making him visible again, she said quietly to Matteo. Yes. And that doesn't scare you?
No.
Leonardo looked up at Matteo, eyes sharp. It should, he said. Matteo's expression did not change. Respect is not fear, he replied. The distinction hung heavy. Outside, Sophia noticed the unfamiliar sedan that had been circling the block earlier slow once more. This time, it did not linger. It continued past. Matteo's men remained stationed at a distance, not blocking access, not intimidating residents, simply present. Visible. The message was clear. This facility was not neutral territory for opportunists. It was under watch. Leonardo's hand trembled faintly as he reached toward the flowers.
They believe age erases memory,
he murmured. It doesn't erase legacy, Matteo answered. Sophia felt something shift inside her. For weeks, she had feared her grandfather was disappearing. Feared that the disease would reduce him to fragments of himself. But what she was witnessing now was something different. His mind might falter. His memories might blur at the edges. But the respect attached to his name remained intact. Untouched. Matteo leaned slightly closer. I will ensure no one confuses illness with weakness, he said quietly. Leonardo studied him for a long moment. You stand publicly, he said.
Yes.
And you risk escalation. Matteo's gaze remained steady. I risk misunderstanding. Sophia stepped forward, placing her hand over her grandfather's. This isn't about power, she said softly. No, Matteo replied.
It is about continuity.
Leonardo exhaled slowly.
There is a difference, he murmured.
The hallway gradually resumed its quiet rhythm. Nurses returned to their stations. Residents shuffled past. But something had changed. The atmosphere was steadier now,
Less speculative.
more certain. Sophia looked down at her grandfather. The tremor in his fingers, the faint confusion creeping back into his eyes. "Is it morning?" he asked quietly.
Her throat tightened.
"Almost," she whispered. He nodded faintly, gaze drifting toward the window. Matteo remained beside him. Not as a commander, not as a rival, but as acknowledgement. Sophia finally understood something she hadn't before. Dementia could blur faces. It could steal dates and names. But it could not erase the mark a life had left on others. Her grandfather's mind might be fading, but his legacy was not. And for the first time since the diagnosis, that realization did not frighten her. It steadied her.